Welcome to World Insight. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. On November 19, 2025, the United States Supreme Court delivered a decision that would reverberate far beyond the marble steps of its iconic building. The ruling sent shockwaves through Washington and across the nation, capturing the attention of lawmakers, legal scholars, and everyday Americans alike. At the heart of the case was President Donald Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to impose sweeping tariffs on foreign goods, an action that sparked fierce debate about the limits of executive authority. The core question before the court was profound. Can a president invoke emergency powers to set broad economic policy, a responsibility that has traditionally belonged to Congress? The answer would have far-reaching consequences for the separation of powers. This case was about much more than trade policy. It was a test of the fundamental balance of power between the executive and legislative branches of government. The ruling comes after years of expanding presidential authority, including last year's Trump v. United States decision, which granted broad immunity for official acts and set a new precedent for executive power. Today's decision marks a pivotal turning point, drawing a clear and unmistakable line on the limits of presidential power and reaffirming the role of the judiciary in checking executive overreach. The implications are vast and immediate, touching businesses, consumers, and the very structure of American governance. From Wall Street to Main Street, the effects will be felt in boardrooms, markets, and households across the country. This is not just another legal ruling, it's a truly historic event, one that will shape the future of American democracy and redefine the boundaries of presidential power for generations to come. To understand today's ruling, we need to look back, not just at the legal arguments, but at the extraordinary actions that set this case in motion. It all began with a series of bold decisions that ultimately brought the dispute before the Supreme Court, capturing the nation's attention. In early 2025, President Trump took an aggressive stance on trade, targeting countries like China with new tariffs. These measures were announced with great fanfare, signaling a dramatic shift in U.S. economic policy. He invoked the IEEPA, a law originally designed for true national emergencies, to justify these sweeping tariffs, 20% on some Chinese goods, 10% on many others. The move was unprecedented in its scope and ambition. These tariffs made imports more expensive, aiming to boost American-made products and pressure foreign governments. For consumers and businesses alike, the impact was immediate. Prices rose, supply chains shifted, and uncertainty grew. Critics argued the IEEPA was never intended for broad economic policy but for targeted sanctions in genuine crises. Legal scholars and business leaders questioned whether the president had overstepped his authority. They said Trump was seizing powers that belonged to Congress, which has the constitutional authority to regulate commerce and levy taxes. The debate quickly became a constitutional flashpoint. A coalition of importers and business groups sued, winning in lower courts. Their victory sent shockwaves through the business community and the halls of government. The administration appealed, insisting the president needed flexibility to protect economic security in a rapidly changing world. They argued that swift action was essential to safeguard American interests. The stage was set for a Supreme Court showdown over the separation of powers, a case that would test the limits of executive authority and congressional oversight. The economic fate of countless American businesses hung in the balance as the nation waited for the highest court to decide the future of presidential power and the rules of American trade. During oral arguments, the Supreme Court justices showed deep skepticism about the president's claims. Chief Justice Roberts emphasized that tariffs are essentially taxes, a core power of Congress. Justice Gorsuch and others raised concerns about the president usurping Congress's constitutional authority. The administration argued the IEEPA gave the president broad discretion, but the justices questioned whether Congress ever intended to hand over such sweeping power. The sheer scale of the tariffs, nearly $195 billion in a year, made the president's actions look more like lawmaking than emergency regulation. Only Justices Alito and Thomas seemed sympathetic to the administration. The majority signaled they would not accept the use of a 1977 law as a blank check for unilateral trade policy. The courtroom debate foreshadowed a landmark ruling reasserting congressional power. While legal arguments played out in Washington, small businesses across America felt the pain of the tariffs. For many owners, these new costs arrived suddenly, disrupting budgets and plans that had been carefully laid out for the year. The uncertainty made it difficult to know how to move forward, and every decision became a gamble. Companies like Deerstags, a family-owned shoe business, paid over $1 million in extra tariffs this year, money that could have gone to hiring or growth. Instead, they faced tough choices: raise prices and risk losing customers, or absorb the costs and cut back elsewhere. For a small business, every dollar counts, and these unexpected expenses hit hard. Green Bar Distillery lost 10% of its profits to tariffs on imported glass, forcing them to consider automation and job cuts. The owners worried about their employees' futures, knowing that every lost dollar could mean fewer jobs or reduced hours. The ripple effects extended beyond the business, touching families and communities. For small businesses, these costs were devastating, threatening their survival and competitiveness. Many struggled to keep their doors open, and some were forced to close for good. The sense of uncertainty grew with each passing month. The policy meant to protect American jobs was, in some cases, putting them at risk. Instead of boosting local industry, tariffs sometimes led to layoffs and shuttered factories, especially in communities already struggling to stay afloat. Across industries, from bicycles to furniture, the story was the same: higher costs, tough choices, and uncertain futures. Business owners scrambled to find new suppliers or cut expenses, but options were limited. The pressure was relentless. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned that a court ruling against the administration could mean refunding up to $1 trillion in tariffs. The stakes were enormous, not just for the government, but for every business affected by these policies. For every dollar collected, a business somewhere paid the price, often the smallest players. These were the entrepreneurs and family businesses that form the backbone of the American economy, now struggling to stay afloat. The economic impact was massive and deeply personal for those on the front lines. For many, the future remained uncertain, and the hope was that relief would come before it was too late. The Supreme Court's decision draws a clear line on presidential power, ruling that Trump exceeded his authority under the IEPA. No future president can use emergency powers to impose broad, long-term economic policies without Congress. This reasserts the separation of powers and restores Congress's constitutional role in trade and taxation. The decision counters the recent trend of expanding executive authority, especially after last year's ruling on presidential immunity. Major changes to tariffs and trade agreements will now require debate and legislation in Congress. Presidents retain power for targeted sanctions in true emergencies, but not for launching trade wars alone. The ruling encourages Congress to reclaim its responsibilities and oversee presidential actions more assertively. In the long run, this could lead to a more balanced and stable government. Amid legal debates, Warren Buffett's perspective on trade offers practical wisdom. Buffett, a champion of free trade, believes prosperity comes from countries focusing on their strengths and trading for what others do best. He likens it to a brilliant doctor hiring a typist. Everyone benefits when each does what they're best at. Buffett argues tariffs are a self-inflicted wound, raising costs for American consumers and businesses. He warns that trade wars hurt everyone, leading to higher prices and retaliation from other countries. Open markets, he says, drive competition, innovation, and higher living standards. Today's Supreme Court decision, by limiting unilateral tariffs, aligns with Buffett's philosophy. It creates stability and predictability for businesses, something investors value. Buffett's decades of experience show that long-term prosperity comes from cooperation, not protectionism. His views remind us of the real-world impact behind the legal arguments. The Supreme Court's decision to strike down Trump's unilateral tariffs is a defining moment for American government and the economy. By reaffirming Congress's role in economic policy, the court has pushed back against unchecked executive power. The end of sweeping tariffs brings relief to small and medium businesses, and likely lower prices for consumers. The ruling restores stability and predictability to trade, moving away from confrontation toward negotiation and legislation. It forces the executive and legislative branches to work together on critical economic issues. The verdict clarifies constitutional boundaries and offers relief to a strained economy. The power to tax and regulate commerce belongs to Congress, not the president alone. Today marks a true turning point for the nation.